and welcome to one more chapter with me, Kay. I'm Alleena. So today I'm going to be doing a book tag with you guys, and this is the hashtag Read Anyway book tag. And this is an idea sent to me by my friend Jade, who owns the website readanyway.com. And her goal is to teach grade school kids that it's okay, no matter how busy we are in life, that we can read anyway. I'm doing a book tag, and hopefully you guys will follow along. Maybe in this tag you'll find some good books that you haven't picked up before, or maybe you'll even be inspired to do this tag yourself, because there are times when I'm sure everyone was so busy that it felt like you could barely read a page in peace. So, without further ado, on to the book tag. First question is, what's the first book that you remember really got you into reading? For me, that's going to be The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And I was young. I think I was about 7, and I wasn't really into writing or reading yet. I had been reading a couple of things like the kids' books, and I did enjoy reading, but I wasn't necessarily really into reading. I wasn't what you would consider a bookworm back then. I did read plenty, but I liked video games a whole lot more than I liked books back in the day when I was really young. And that's not to say I don't love them still, but this book changed my perspective. Not only was it the reason I really started reading, but it was the reason I started writing too. And it was one of those books, not this particular copy. The copy that I was given didn't have a cover on it, but it was given to me by my uncle when I was 7. He said, "One day this will be super important to you." And I started writing, and I haven't stopped because I was so in love with the storyline and the characters. I always wrote myself as the wizard, and all of my classroom friends were the dwarves and the hobbits that would go on adventures with me. And so I haven't stopped reading, and I haven't stopped writing, and this is because of The Hobbit. So that's my answer to number 1. Number 2 is, what book were you really apprehensive about reading, but really enjoyed anyway? For me, that's going to be On Stranger Tides by Tim Powers. And the reason is because I hadn't read very much historical fiction by the time that I got to this book. I had heard that he was a good author, but I hadn't read anything by him, and again, I hadn't really read that much historical fiction. At that point, I was more into the whole fantasy thing, and I basically exclusively read fantasy. Now, this does have an element of fantasy to it. I'm not going to spoil it too much. I might review this when I reread it later, but it was definitely more historical. That being said, in a few years after I read this, it was, turned into the movie Pirates of the Caribbean 4, which is also On Stranger Tides. It has a little bit to do with the book, but it's not really super close to the book. So I had read this, and I went into the movie thinking they were going to turn some of the best points into it. And well, it was an amazing movie, and in fact, one of my favorites, and this is one of my favorite books. It was more important to me because that was when I started to write my pirate book. So I really enjoyed this book, and like I said, it became one of my favorites because of the movie, because of the way that they changed everything, and the way that I was able to be inspired by the adventures of pirates, and the way that things got twisted into fantasy a little tiny bit. And bonus point, another book that I wasn't sure I was going to love when I picked it up was Under the Black Flag, and this is a history book, so this isn't actually fantasy or fiction at all. This is nonfiction, and I thought, it's going to be so boring. But because of On Stranger Tides and the movie, the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, I decided to write a novel based on pirates, and so I picked this one up for research, and I keep coming back to it, and I love it so much. People don't really look at me and say, "Oh, that is a person that's going to know everything about pirates," but because of this book, I spout off random facts every once in a while when people ask me questions, or if people start talking about pirates and they're incorrect, I'll just be like, "Wait a second, let me tell you a thing," and it's because of this book. So I was apprehensive about reading a nonfiction history book, but this one really changed the way that I wrote my novel and the way that I looked at things. So there's that. Question number 3 is, what series would you drop all responsibility to read if a new book came out? And for me, that's definitely the Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss. And the first book is Name of the Wind. And actually, when Slow Regard of Silent Things came out, I did drop everything to read this. It's a novella, so it's a little bit smaller, but I did drop everything to read this, all the homework that I had to do during school and everything. If I remember correctly, this book came out the end of 2014, and that was the first semester of my senior year, and I had a lot of projects to do, and I was barely ever home, but I did drop everything to read this, and this is set in the Kingkiller Chronicle world. Actually, it's based on one of the I wouldn't say main characters, but an interesting character that I love to read about. So yes, I did drop everything to read something, regardless of how busy I was. I read this book anyway. Question number 4 is, what book got you through the most difficult or busy time that you can remember so far? So for me, that was last semester. It was the last semester of my senior year in college, and I had all capstone and thesis classes, and it was so hard to keep up with everything. And not only that, in the middle of April, I lost one of my cousins, and it was a really hard time to even think straight, let alone read or write or finish anything that had to do with school. I had to work, I had an internship, and it was just really difficult. Reading seemed to be the only way that I can kind of center myself again and find out, what was still important to me when there was all this chaos. And so one of the books that I read was The Secrets of Life and Death, and I'll link to my review of it below. It was a book that I just kind of found, and my mom picked it up for me when we were at the River's End bookstore. She had visited a couple weeks earlier for, spring break, and I was at that time, every single book that I picked up, I didn't want to read it. Nothing seemed normal, nothing seemed good. So once I finally did pick this one up, which was appropriate for the time, I got engrossed in it. I read it anyway, despite all of the things that were going on with me. It was a difficult time. Not only was it difficult, but it was busy. I was almost never home. I was doing so many projects and working on my thesis for the end of the year and working through a lot of grief, and yet I read this anyway. And not only did I read just this book, I picked up the sequel, and I read that one in a couple days after that one came in too, because these characters helped me through one of the most difficult times in my life so far, and I couldn't let the story go. I was so glad to be able to read these books. They were fantastic, and I don't know, I guess I feel like, especially in times of difficulty, if you are a bookworm, even if it feels like you can't reach for a book because everything just seems so crazy, I think if it's part of your identity and who you are to be a reader and to be, one who is involved very, very much with stories, I think it's important to read. So, yes, I picked up these books and I read all straight through them regardless of everything that I had to do because it was important to me. It helped me remember who I was, and it helped me remember that I could just keep going, and that was really important at the time. So, yes, it was important to read anyway, regardless of everything I was going through. And question number 5. What's a reread that helps you find your center when everything seems all chaotic, or if you're in a reading slump and can't figure out what you want to read next, or just haven't felt like reading much anymore because of chaos or because of life in general? It doesn't matter. What's a reread that helps you find your center again? For me, that is The Neverending Story by Michael Ende, and this book I read when I was in middle school, so I was about 12 or so, and my friend had lent it to me, and what it is about how important we are to stories. This is kind of like saying, no matter what, the reader is going to be the most important part of the story experience. And for me, as a person who's always been a writer and a storyteller myself, this book was important. And every single time I feel like I can't read anymore, I feel like my life is spinning out of control, more so than just one event or just one semester, just things feel confusing, I don't feel like picking up books anymore, this is the book I read anyway. And I come back to it when I have time to reread because, like I said, it's about the relationship a reader has with the story. It's about the magic that we as readers have when we interact with writing, and I think it's super cool. I was really young, I loved the movie, and when I found out it was a book, that was the best thing ever. So this book, The Neverending Story, is super important. I think I've read it 13 times at least in my life that I can think of right off the top of my head, and I'll probably be reading it again soon, not just for a review, just because I think when life seems to hand me lemons, this book is lemonade. Oh, that was stupid, but you know, it's true. It's true. So there you go. And the last question isn't really about like picking a book or anything. It's, why do you think it's important to read anyway? Why is it important to keep picking up books? And for me, as a writer, I think it's important to read no matter how busy I am, no matter how difficult my life is getting, because it's just, stories bring something magical to the world. People who write and share their stories, people who are storytellers, are sharing pieces of their souls with the entire world. And I think that's super important. And every single time I pick up a book, I learn something new. Whether it's Fangirl, which is a new adult type novel and a really easy read, or The Silmarillion by Tolkien, or a nonfiction history book, all of these things bring new knowledge in some significant way, a new way to look at the world, a new way to understand what's going on in life, and you never know what book is going to be super inspiring to you. Because I was given the book The Hobbit and I had picked it up and read it, I am still reading and writing today, and that's super important. So I think no matter what comes your way, no matter how difficult life can be, because it can be, I think it's super important to read it anyway. You get this kind of sense that you belong in this world, and you belong in this place where there's myriad stories to be shared and to be picked up and read, and maybe you have a story to tell. Maybe a book is the only way that you know how to communicate that story, by saying that this book really meant a lot to me, so I need you to read it so you can understand where I'm coming from. I think words are powerful that way, and especially in times when we feel like there's nothing and nowhere and everything seems to be collapsing in on itself. I think that's especially the most important time to pick up a new book, to pick up a story that brings you back to your center. And that's it, to read anyway. I think that's just the most important thing. And that's the video and the book tag, and I'm going to tag a few people so that they can tell us their stories and tell you why it's important to read anyway. So, the first person I want to tag is Sam from Novels of Nonsense. The second I want to tag is Kelly from Kelly's Book Spill. Then Vanessa from Jabosky. Then Lorian from Lorian Kitty Books. Then Heather from Bookables. And finally Reagan from the Peruse Project. If you guys want to do this book tag, just comment below when you do your video and I'll be over to watch it, and I'll send them on to Jade for her website, and everything's gonna be awesome. Thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you for listening to all of my rambling. Hit the subscribe button below if you want to hear more, and I'll be back soon with another video. Bye!